Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. Just a reminder that at 5:30 p.m. PST, 8:30 p.m. EST, it's Theater Thursday, and I will be discussing Henry King's fine 1949 film, 12 O'Clock High. We have some other suggestions here from Anrun, Breaker Morant, and the Friends of Eddie Coyle. I saw the Friends of Eddie Coyle when it came out in the 70s. I was quite impressed by that movie. Chogokin666 says Robert Mitchum is great in that, as well as Peter Boyle. Yes, as far as I remember, they were both quite good. I'm going to start today by talking about Pozlandia, or invertebrate Canada, one might call it. Shocking story from Edmonton, Alberta. This is from Global News. Hate-filled pro-white Instagram account connected to Edmonton school condemned by officials. According to Allison Bench, the Edmonton Public School Board is condemning a White Alliance student group connected to Strathcona High School that appeared on social media over the weekend. The Scona White Student Alliance Instagram page made its first post on Sunday, February the 14th, where it announced that White Lives Matter, a phrase that has been tied to white nationalism and hate groups. When I went looking for the Instagram page yesterday, it appears that it had been taken down, by whom I don't know. And I found a number of examples, screenshots of Instagram posts. Here is one. There's a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. speaking in Washington in 1963. It says, Scona White Student Alliance fight against Black supremacy and hypocrisy in our school. Time to stop the anti-white racism and make everyone equal. Yes, Strathcona High School has been increasingly anti-white rather than pro-Black for the past few months. The post said, we are all equal and race should be ignored. We must judge each other by our actions, not by the color of our skin, which is very close to what King said. The school has reported the account and has made Edmonton Police Service aware of it as well. A statement from the board to Global News said, there is zero tolerance for hate-filled accounts and posts like this. To say that White Lives Matter is apparently hate. Well, we've known that for quite some time. I suppose we've also known that the primary purpose of public schools in both Canada and the United States is to inveigh against whites, their history, their communities, their countries, their civilizations, their achievements. White people are a cancer on human history, as Susan Sontag notoriously said. Tricia Estabrooks, the school board chair, said Tuesday that she believes the post highlights the need to fight systemic racism in our education systems. We can't shy away from having these tough conversations in our classrooms, in our schools, and in our broader society. This is an opportunity to have those tough conversations. This post just shows to me just how clearly needed these conversations are and how more work needs to be done. Well, as you know, as I pointed out previously, when a member of the elite says that there needs to be tough conversations, what that means is I am going to speak and you are going to shut up, or you will know the reason why. It's really disheartening to see, said student Ethan Lawyer. I was kind of personally upset because that's not how I want our school represented. We're a great place with great people, I think. I think there should certainly be consequences for their actions. I do not think that's a fair way at all to represent their school, especially seeing our school's logo being used on the account. The person who was behind that was a coward, said grade 11 student Semi, S-E-M-I, Wolgamuth. Guaranteed they would probably not say that in real life. Estabrook said a similar Twitter account had also been started, but has since shut down. She said it is disappointing that the Instagram was still active as of Tuesday afternoon. The fact that it existed, the fact that it is harmful, the fact that it is blatantly racist, even if it had a small spread, doesn't take away the fact that this was done. And it has an impact. The school also sent an update letter from its principal, Hans van Ginhoven, to parents at the school Tuesday after the initial one was sent on the weekend. Today, there were, wait for it, conversations throughout the school about who we want to be, how we can do and be better, and ensure our BIPOC students feel part of this community. This is ongoing work, and with your support, I know we will make steps in the right direction. The letter also said that the school engaged Edmonton Police Service to look into this account. Edmonton Police commented on one of the posts through one of its official accounts and said the Hate Crimes Unit had been made aware of the group and would be following up. Another post on the account showed a video of Black activist Martin Luther King during his famous I Have a Dream speech in 1963, where King pushed for the end of racism. Quote, "Society is being dominated by victimhood and anti-white racism. We are slowly regressing back to the starting point where others are treated differently based on the color of their skin. Our school has been doing the exact same thing. We are facing straight up racism against white people in our school." Well, yes. The great Peter Simple told us that racism is a word of almost no efficacy and should always be printed within inverted commas. But if it is a school that will not allow people to say that white lives matter, well, it is clearly Black supremacist. No question about it. February is recognized as Black History Month in the US and Canada. And in 1971, there were 34,400 Black people in Canada. So effectively, Black people in Canada have little or no history until far more recent times. There are now, I believe, 1.2 million Black people in Canada, something like a little over 3% of the population. On Tuesday night, someone from the Scona White Student Alliance account provided a statement to Global News, but declined to disclose their identity, clever boys, citing the threats they claim that have been made against them. In the statement, the person or persons behind the account said they want the school to end what they called an anti-white curriculum and to acknowledge the existence of reverse racism, a theory that the Alberta Civil Liberties Research Centre says is a myth. Ah, yes, the argument from authority. The experts say, and I'll have more to say about experts a little later in this live stream. In the statement, the person or persons behind the account also reiterated, or, as a better writer might say, repeated the phrase, "all lives matter," a term that many have described as being hurtful. So very hurtful. Oh, yes, and this is a huge story across Canada, and it's even, CTV News, White Student Alliance Instagram account, a reminder of work to do, says Edmonton Public School Board Chair. And just shocking posts basically saying, stop beating up on white people for being white. That's pretty much all it says. It's pretty much all it says. And there's a story from westernstandardonline.com where I've got several of the stories I'm going to be talking about. This has turned into quite a good website covering stories that the mainstream media, which is pretty much all the media in Canada, does not want to be heard. According to Alexander Dollawall, the creators of the controversial Scona White Student Alliance Instagram page are preparing a class action suit against fellow students at Strathcona High School for uttering violent threats over its content, including a tirade condemning anti-racism discussions in the classroom and its anti-white rhetoric. In their first post, they called for racial equality, note equality, not equity, for individuals to be judged by their actions and the content of their character. However, They also exclaimed, "White Lives Matter," in the same post. Okay, Edmonton's public school division. The high school took to Facebook to express their disdain of the inappropriate, racist, hate-filled Instagram account. We have heard from many of our Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, students who feel unsafe and unwelcome at our school. This simply isn't who we are, who we aspire to be, nor is it in keeping with our motto as one who serves. As a community, we will continue to work to ensure our school is welcoming for our Black, Indigenous, and people of color students. On Reddit, I found a long post. Let's see, expel the kid who created the Scona White Students Alliance in Instagram. And I guarantee you this kid's going to go public claiming they were canceled right to Rebel News' doorstep and gain a cult following we don't need right now. Keep the kid in school and they influence others and make people of color feel unsafe. Well, if you're in if you're a student in a school where you're told that you as a white person are wicked, that you have always been wicked, that all white people are racist and this is incurable, whereas Blacks apparently invented everything and have an enormous impact on Canadian history, whereas they have none, who is more likely to be safe? I went to Scona years ago, and the staff, if the staff is anything like I remember, they're not taking this lightly. I remember our vice principal stopping by every single classroom the day before Halloween, pleading with us not to wear racially insensitive costumes. The leadership students put on annual bike-a-thons to raise millions of dollars for local and global charitable causes. Millions of dollars? Really? I doubt that. The school has active groups for LGBTQ students, Black students, Indigenous students, and students with disabilities. Yes, everyone is represented except white people. We hosted Eva Olson, a Holocaust survivor, for an optional lunchtime seminar, and the gym was packed with students who wanted to learn from her. And yet I remember Halloween vividly at Scona. I remember two Barbie white, oh boo, Pocahontases walking the halls, and a group of guys dressed up as ISIS beheading a journalist in the official costume contest. I remember the wealthiest kids who could donate the most at Bike-a-thon getting front row seats at major events, sidelining those who could only reach the minimum donation with weeks of dedicated effort. Outside of the tiny little AP bubbles, I noticed a marked ethnic divide between friend groups eating and studying together in little enclaves because the minorities rarely made it into peak positions on sports teams or in the musical. Sounds like this fellow had a terrible, terrible experience at Scona High School. I hope that this person has received the therapy that he needed. And I salute his testimony. All survivors need to speak out. Official statement from Edmonton Public Schools. Our schools are honoring Black History Month and celebrating the contributions that Black Canadians have made to our schools, our community, and our city. That's pretty much close to a big fat zero. In addition, our division is planning on the development of locally developed courses related to anti-racism education. I believe that Edmonton Public Schools has an important role and responsibility in eliminating racism. Racism, however you want to define it, cannot be eliminated. And in fact, the anti-racist activists tell us on a daily basis that all white people are racist, and there's nothing that can be done about this. Nothing at all that can be done about it. Let's see. DJ Kelly, who describes himself as a citizen government Imagineer. Ooh. He has 6,107 followers, and he's talking about racism. It was understanding this difference that led me to be able to admit I am a racist. That was hard because I've always had this vision in my head of a racist being a hateful person, and I'm not that. The system I was raised and live in has white privilege designed into it. It's also empowering because I know now that I can also be anti-racist by taking steps to make the system more equitable. Yes, again, not equal, but equitable and fair by supporting the removal of barriers others who don't like me face. And what barriers might those be? You don't get a lot of specificity there. There's another story from the Western Standard. Police union blasts Calgary councillor for race baiting. The Calgary Police Association says a city councillor is race baiting after he attacked officers for shaking hands with a white COVID-19 mask protester. A video emerged of a Calgary Police Service constable shaking hands and embracing a protester after breaking up a rally at Chinook Centre. I agree that hugging white people flouting public health orders is not a good look, tweeted Councillor Giancarlo Cara. Who, again, to use the joke from Go, if Giancarlo Cara were any more white, he would be clear. He is a ginger, in fact. Getting to the bottom of what's going on here and providing guidance towards better outcomes is your police commission's job. That'll happen at the public meeting on February 23rd. Mike Baker, vice president of the Calgary Police Association, lashed out in the comments saying Cara isn't fit to serve on city council. This statement is divisive / racist political opportunism, Baker tweeted. I wonder how long he will have his job with the Calgary Police Association. Oh, and here's from Edmonton Against Fascism. Saturday's anti-lockdown rally in Calgary, mall visit, police shaking hands and getting close with a protester, Pavlovsky, who has been ticketed dozens of times and has called the cops Nazis, etc., encourages the crowd to thank the police. Yes, this Cara fella was raised in New York City. And what do we know about him? Apparently, yes, he's married to Barb Cara, whom he met in 2003 playing Ultimate Frisbee. Yes, yes. What a sweet, sweet story. And Cara is, he believes that his own position has been justified by opposition to it, that bad people are speaking out against him. Bad people. The Kerry Noth of Oatley tweeted to Cara, I want you guys to click on his avatar and zoom in on his face. There's actual species divergence going on right now. You can't convince me otherwise. Councillor Cara responded, as with the conversion therapy debate, nothing convinced me that we needed a ban more than the arguments against banning it. My commitment to anti-racism has only been bolstered by the discussion provoked by my comment re Calgary Police's handling of the protest this weekend. Should they have gone in with billy clubs and especially singled out white people for being bashed in the head? Here's a touching personal confession from Councillor Giancarlo Cara. I was in high school in New York City in the 1980s, and I remember feeling outraged when Spike Lee asserted that BIPOC couldn't be racist against white people as they didn't hold enough power to affect racism. I got over it. Spike Lee is right. Eliminating systems of oppression is the mission. Yes, and my country, Canada, is run almost exclusively by people who earn money, often very good money, by telling the majority of people that they are bad, that their country, Canada, is bad, has always been bad. And white people are racists and always will be racists. And that the primary purpose of schools is to instruct white children that they should hate themselves. I'm sure that won't have a terrible effect in the future. No. It's obviously going to have a happy ending. Let's go to the chat. Yes, Chogokin 666 says conversation, we talk, you listen. HIB positive transgender says whites pay taxes to have their children be told, that they're bad people. Great system. Anrun says, shouldn't stores have more sales on peanut butter in February? None of my local stores do. Oh, let's see. I just watched my first and probably last two Corey's movies. Glib Medley says, blown away, 1993. It wasn't bad. Again, from Chokokin 666, that official statement validates the kid's claim. Half Galician says, Glib Medley never saw The Lost Boys. That's a pretty fun movie. Okay, Glib Medley says, not into the vampire genre, too romantic. David Wright says, I don't remember Lost Boys being romantic. Yo Mama says, why is everything so fake and gay? Well, because we live under a system which supposedly is based on the consent of the governed. And there's no consent there. There's no consent at all. Enron says The Night Stalker is an underrated vampire movie. It was at the time the highest rated TV movie ever. Let's see. If you have played Ultimate Frisbee, you were automatically disqualified from everything, says HIV positive transgender. Glib Medley says, blown away, got me onto a cheesy 90s kick. I'm interrupting a viewing of Face of Evil, 1996, with Tracy Gold. Isn't she one of those TV stars who had a miserable life after TV? Okay, let's have more on invertebrate Canada. Oh, yes, a shocking story from Toronto, capital of Ontario. This is from Sean Davidson at CTV News. Ford, that would be Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario and leader of Ford Nation, owes apology to every woman in Ontario after hurling sexist comment, says NDP leader Andrea Horwath. So I saw this story and I thought, what did Doug Ford say? Something about how she should be home baking cookies for the kiddies? And but no, it was even more shocking than that. Horwath said she believed it is disturbing to see how far this government is prepared to go in order to justify the rushed reopening of our province. When will the Premier actually start listening to the hospitals, to the doctors, to his own experts, and prevent this province from going into yet another third wave and lockdown? No, let's just lock down Ontario forever. Ontario has gone after Quebec, the furthest in Canada, but it's not enough for Andrea Horwath. Ford fired back, saying his government has listened to Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. David Williams, since the beginning of the pandemic. I've never wavered from that, Ford said, rather than sitting there and constantly criticizing from day one. Why don't you come and join us to support the people of Ontario for once, rather than just sit there and criticize? It's like listening to nails on a chalkboard, listening to you. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. After the comment was made, Horwath replied saying, this Premier always goes to the worst places when he doesn't like the questions the opposition is asking. Completely inappropriate, she said. I think every woman in Ontario deserves an apology for Mr. Ford's comments. There's no way that the Premier of Ontario should be using those kinds of sexist terms. Ontario Green Party leader Mike Schreiner tweeted shortly after Ford made the remark that he should unequivocally apologize for his comment. This kind of misogynist attack is unacceptable. Stephen Del Duca, who is the Liberal Party leader in Ontario, said misogynist rhetoric like this has no place in the Ontario legislature. For it to be hurled by a premier is unthinkable. Doug Ford should apologize immediately. We expect better. I responded that he should drink some cranberry juice and calm down. So, nails on a blackboard. Apparently only women have unpleasant voices. This is the clear implication here. Andrea Horwath is want to say things such as women are just as strong as men, if not stronger. But here we have Andrea Horwath saying, in effect, the big bad man made fun of my voice. How dare he? I'm just a widow girl. Whee! Yeah. Another strong woman, who is simply going to use her female privilege in order to suggest very strongly that she can't be criticized. All sorts of people are criticized. Not just male politicians are criticized. Let's look at Donald Trump. He was criticized for his hair, criticized for his face, criticized for the supposed size of his penis. I remember CNN last year devoting, an hour or so to this? But no. It's only female politicians who are criticized for their voices or their looks. The Supreme Court of Canada in recent years has decided that prostitution is a constitutionally guaranteed right. Yeah. You know why? You know how they came to that decision? Well, you see, since prostitution, or properly speaking, the solicitation of prostitution was illegal under Canada's criminal code, this made those who engaged in the solicitation of prostitution criminals. And criminals are at higher risk than most people. And this is unjust. So therefore, prostitution must be legalized. And the Supreme Court of Canada also ruled that doctors have the constitutionally guaranteed right to murder patients. They call it euthanasia. And apparently, after the Liberals passed a bill which legalized euthanasia, the champions of euthanasia, including David Frum's sister, Senator Linda Frum, countered that under this Liberal bill, not enough people are going to be murdered by doctors. Andrew Coyne, who is considered to be Canada's foremost right-wing journalist, or even conservative, he is a radical autonomist. That's the only way that one can describe him. And he is comically obsessed with process. He writes in the Globe and Mail, every time the Senate threatens to veto a bill passed by the House of Commons, its defenders rush to assure us that this is an extraordinary case, the exception, not the rule. And it's true. Most of the time, the Senate does not obstruct democracy. Forgive me if I do not find this greatly reassuring. I'm of the school that says in a democracy, only the people we elect should decide how we are governed. Well, then we shouldn't have a Senate then, should we, Andrew Coyne? The fact is that we do have a Senate, and Canada is not a pure democracy. I'm of the school that says in a democracy, only the people we elect should decide how we are governed. I'm surprised he didn't spontaneously combust after typing that, because for decades now, it is the Supreme Court of Canada, 9 unelected men and women in black robes, who decide how Canadians are governed. But okay, we shall see whether the same applies with regards to Bill C-7, the government's response to a Quebec Superior Court ruling that its first attempt at legalizing assisted suicide, or physician-assisted murder, as I call it, did not go far enough. The Senate has passed 5 amendments to the bill, as making the usual noises in defense of its impertinence. That is their job. Question of principle, fundamental rights, sober second thought, etc. The bill's demerits are not in doubt, Andrew Coyne admits. It was unnecessary for starters. The Quebec court had no legal basis to object to the law's requirement that death be reasonably foreseen. The Supreme Court in R versus Carter may have declined to insert such a condition, but it did not say that governments could not. Its ruling could and should have been appealed. What is more, nothing in the ruling obliged the government to eliminate the mandatory 10-day waiting period after a request for assisted suicide, or to reduce the required number of witnesses from 2 to 1, to cite two of C7's more gratuitous provisions. It would be better if the bill were withdrawn or amended or even referred to the Supreme Court. The world would not end if the government failed to meet the Quebec court's February 26th deadline. Yes, a court in Quebec can order the government of Canada what to do, apparently. But Andrew Coyne says it is not for the Senate to impose such changes. No. Advocates for the first group were quick to note the implication, better dead than disabled, even as advocates for the second complained of being discriminated against. In Canada, according to Andrew Coyne, there is no monstrosity that can be imposed upon us by the Supreme Court of Canada. We can't do anything about it. If old people or depressed people or whatever are being killed by doctors, we're just going to have to live with it because that's Canada. And I suppose that it is. There is a person in Canada that Americans may have heard of. You know, it's one of those wacky stories. It's like, can you believe this guy? And his name used to be Jonathan Yaniv, and he is now Jessica Yaniv, and but also calls themselves Jessica Simpson. And this person sued some Asian ladies who ran a beauty salon because he demanded a waxing when he had a penis and scrotum, and the Asian ladies said they would not do that. He took that to the Human Rights Tribunal. He also went to the Human Rights Tribunal because he was not allowed to compete in a female beauty pageant. But wait, there's more. This is from a little earlier in the month. Transgender activist and serial human rights complainer Jessica Yaniv is being accused of harassing Langley firefighters, calling them dozens of times to lift her out of the bath. The fire department sent Yaniv, who sometimes goes by the name Simpson, a letter telling her she will face charges if she continues to ask for help getting out of the bath. Since January 21st, the fire department has received and responded to over 30 such calls for assistance, none of which constituted a medical emergency, the letter to Yaniv states. Further, we understand that during the fire department attendance at your home, you have engaged in inappropriate and lewd conduct towards fire department staff. Your conduct has created, among other things, an inappropriate and unsafe environment for fire department staff. This is not acceptable to the township and will not be tolerated going forward. There is much more about Jessica Yaniv, including that person's attempt to organize an adult-free nude bathing party for minors. Yeah. And if you genuinely want to be sickened or horrified that the insanity that goes unpunished in Canada, you can read about Jessica, don't want to misgender this person, Jessica Yaniv's, shall we say, interactions with young women. Gotta be careful what I say about this person. Quite litigious. This is from Lena Dibb of the Canadian Press. Comedian Mike Ward's case before Supreme Court tests limits of artistic freedom. The Supreme Court of Canada heard an appeal about a joke told at a comedy club. Yeah, that's right. Mike Ward was found by a lower court to have discriminated against a disabled singer in one of his routines. Ward's lawyer told the 9 judges that Canadians don't have a right not to be offended, and making fun of someone doesn't take away their rights. The lawyer for singer Jeremy Gabriel, who was awarded $35,000 by the Rights Tribunal, said Ward's joke went too far and had long-lasting consequences on the disabled man's life. Yes. Yes, we're litigating jokes now up to the Supreme Court of Canada level. Oh, and how about hockey? Hockey would be, that's still a pretty manly sport, isn't it? I mean, there's no women that play in it. Not yet, anyway. And, of course, hockey has excoriated, the NHL has excoriated itself for its racism. How many black players in the NHL? 3, 4, 5, something like that. It could be that non-whites aren't particularly interested in hockey and prefer other sports, but that is not acceptable. Brian Burke, who is an Alphabet People champion, he is in trouble now because he used a violent metaphor in describing a hockey game. I'm not a fan of Brian Burke. He is a perpetually and comically furious sirloin-faced Irishman. But we see, again, according to the Western Standard, colorful NHL, colorful, that's going to have to go on my euphemism list, has been sent to the sin bin. That's a Canadian reference to the penalty box by the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council for urging a team to finish off its opponent. Burke, in a Sportsnet West broadcast last September 4th, complained the Colorado Avalanche lacked a competitive spirit. Quote, I thought that they went up 3-2, they got complacent. When the team you're playing is flat, that's when you got to put your boot on their throat and put your full body weight on it. They had a chance to put the game away, unquote. The CBSC responded, even if understood as a metaphor, it promotes a level of aggression and violence that could be fatal and well exceeds the customary rough and tumble of a hockey game. I will note that hockey is a sport that allows the game to come to a standstill, often for minutes at a time and often several times a game, while two or more men pummel each other with their fists. The council ruled that Burke's remarks were in poor taste following the May 25th death of George Floyd that prompted Black Lives Matter protests. The panel is of the view that the expression, you got to put your boot on their throat and put your full body weight on it, is not one that is commonly used in sports or otherwise. Oh, boot on their throat? That's an expression which is quite common. Black Lives Matter protests have made us all re-examine terms or expressions that may have been used in the past and whether in today's environment they are appropriate or acceptable. The fact is, Mr. Burke was suggesting it is acceptable to deal with complacency through a violent and graphic act. And apparently the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council doesn't know what a metaphor is, which is pretty amusing because COVID-19 has been thoroughly militarized. Every aspect of it. You remember the frontline heroes? Oh, frontline heroes. Now they're frontline warriors. The fact is, Mr. Burke was suggesting it is acceptable to deal with complacency through a violent and graphic act. NHL hockey games reach a national audience of all ages, including many young viewers. And many young viewers of the NHL will see on routinely, again, the game stopping while various men pummel each other with their fists. They will see vicious, gratuitous checks slamming people headfirst into the boards or the glass. They will see vicious slashing of people. Why doesn't the CSBC come out with the position that hockey is not suitable for people under the age of 18? Burke was cited for breaching the Canadian Association of Broadcasters Violence Code that prohibits gratuitous violence in any form or any reference that sanctions, promotes, or glamorizes violence. The ruling carries no penalty, though Sportsnet must announce the ruling within a week as a condition of its federal license. Yeah, this is how it works. The Canadian Broadcast Standards Council is an industry organization that censors the media in Canada so the government doesn't get involved. Yeah, we're not going to wait for the government to get involved. We'll do it ourselves. And, apparently approved metaphors include go for the jugular put them out of their misery, take off their heads, and other sports cliches clearly understood as metaphors that simply encourage a team to do better. Oh, go for the jugular. Yeah, all right. This is life in Canada. And I was talking to a relative of mine recently about Calgary, and he said that it was going downhill fast, and not just in the, shall we say, depressed areas of the town. A final story here from the Western Standard, this one from Corey Morgan. It began with a tweet. I've been regularly using the west leg of the Calgary LRT in order to get to the Western Standard's downtown offices. As do so many other commuters, I've kept my head down and avoided paying attention to the crime and disorder which surrounded me on the train. On a day where the drug use and disorder was so bad that my blinders slipped, I tweeted out how bad things had gotten. I was greeted by a flood of replies from other exasperated Calgarians who had been enduring the crime wave as well. One person shared a video of a man brazenly smoking what appeared to be meth on the train. As the images and videos of drug use and criminality on Calgary's LRT system began flooding social media, City Hall was forced to respond. Calgary's Transportation General Manager Doug Morgan was questioned by City Council, and he acknowledged that social disorder had increased substantially since the COVID-19 pandemic had begun. I don't really see the connection there. Morgan referenced more than 1,300 covert text conversations in January and 4,000 calls that came from the public on social disorder and safety concerns. In light of the exposure of this crisis of crime in Calgary's transit system, I assumed that at least for the short term, I could see some increases in efforts to make the train safer. I was to be disappointed. During my ride, I saw open drug consumption, one drug deal, and constant loud exchanges from clearly impaired people who dominated the trains. There was no sign of law enforcement anywhere. And he has provided a helpful map showing where the LRT goes and showing where the crime is. And guess what? There's a very close correlation. I saw this in Vancouver. With the when the LRT, the first leg of it was built, and suddenly Metro Town in Burnaby, just over the border from Vancouver, became a very bad place indeed. So there was a comment on this from the Glunk. I used to take the Westbrook to West Winds train daily at 6 a.m. and then the reverse at 4:30 p.m. Peak hours. I counted 300 days without seeing a transit officer. I would have to navigate past 3 to 5 people at the main doors on most mornings. They would usually be passed out, smoking, drinking, or shouting loudly. Transit Security's main office is above Westbrook Station. I called to inquire about why they don't even patrol their own basement. Nothing improved. They all literally report there for work each day, and they ignore the crap at their own doorstep, to say nothing of the rest of the system. Pathetic. Well, I suppose it's because they're depraved on account of being deprived. Famous line from West Side Story. That criminals they're the real victims in all this. And it's unreasonable to expect the police to enforce law and order because white supremacism? Yeah. We know that the police as an institution are an instrument of white supremacism. Even when the cops or the police chief are black, doesn't make any difference. Let's go back to the chat. What about extreme frisbee, says Mike Trail of Disgrace. So there's also something called frolf. Is that different from what we've been talking about? I used to play frisbee when I was a kid. Yeah, it's fun to do, but I see that it has been fetishized by a certain type of person. What else do we have here? Palpicasso 88, how is it misogyny? Lots of guys have annoying voices, e.g. Gilbert Gottfried. Yes, although I understand that's a put on voice. Alex Lurch says, I'm enjoying KMG's coverage of Canada. Well, you can point to San Francisco, say, and other places in the United States as being pause vectors. The difference being is that all of Canada is like that. All of it. There was never any slavery in Canada. And as I explained a few minutes ago, the number of Black people in this country, and as recently as 1971, was notional. But apparently, racism against Black people is just a major, major problem. Essentially, you have a bunch of people whining for jobs. This is what it is. It's rent seeking. And the rent seekers, Canada is an excellent place to be a rent seeker. And about Alberta, you will hear that Alberta is Canada's most conservative province. It is not conservative. It is not conservative because, well, most of the people in Alberta weren't born in Alberta. It's impossible to maintain a conservative society when your population is so transient. In addition, when Alberta got to be known as the wealthiest province in Canada, the province was overrun by types of people that former Mayor of Calgary and Premier of Alberta, Ralph Klein, called Eastern creeps and bums. It was a city. Alberta was full of cities paved with gold. These people have no connection to Alberta whatsoever, except that they believe that they will be better off living there. Also, the province's economy is based overwhelmingly on oil and gas industries, which encourages a boom and bust mentality, which is not conducive to historical continuity, not even close. They replaced him as the voice of Aflac, Gilbert Gottfried, that was. I forget what it was that he did that was so horrible for that. Yes, he was playing a duck, a cartoon or animatronic duck, providing the voice of it. Roulette Crack says, I am deeply offended. Can I get 35,000 people? KMG, do you like Saturday Night Fever, Palpcasso 88? Yeah, I don't know. Not so much. John Travolta, I like John Travolta a lot better, I suppose after he got bald and started playing more dramatic roles or more just old men or whatever. The miniseries that was made, What the People Against O.J. Simpson, where he played Robert Shapiro, I thought he was absolutely hilarious in that. But he is such a goofball that he was on the show Welcome Back, Kotter, which was just, I don't think that I've ever been assaulted with such ugliness on television until, Degrassi Junior High? Teenagers are annoying enough without casting ugly people to play them. Kevin, you didn't like Blowout. Never seen it. Emmett Kelly Zer says, can you escape the pause on Baffin Island? Here's something amusing for you. Nunavut, which is one of the 3 territories above the Arctic Circle, which is practically uninhabited. It has the highest average income in Canada because pretty much everyone who works there works for government. Okay, let's talk again about the rotting corpse of conservatism. Orrin Cass, whose book, The Once and Future American Worker, I believe is The Once and Future Worker, A Vision for the Renewal of Work in Canada. I reviewed his book when the book club was on Luke Ford's live stream. It's quite good. He has written a piece in Foreign Affairs called A New Conservatism, Freeing the Right from Free Market Orthodoxy. Here's the thing. Money, 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 money above all. Let's worship the golden calf. Let's worship mammon. Oh, tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. That is not conservatism. But again, just abandon conservatism. Don't even talk about conservatism, because the meaning of conservatism is controlled by our enemies, people who hate us and wish to do us harm. And the article is behind a paywall. I did manage to find some considerable excerpts from it, and a commentary from Bloomberg, which I will get to. Oh yes, every time I try to open a link from Bloomberg, it wants me to count the number of bicycles or buses or boats. Yes, the dreaded reCAPTCHA ordeal. Well, let's just try opening this up directly. There we go. There we go. CAS begins. The COVID-19 pandemic sent U.S. policymakers scurrying to their bookshelves, searching for responses to a public health catastrophe that threatened to plunge households, businesses, and governments into financial despair. I don't like the planted axiom there. It is not COVID-19. It's not the pandemic that threatened to plunge households, businesses, and governments into financial despair. It was the hysterical panic from our chief Latrine Wallace, who now have executive control over all the governments in Canada, in the United States, in Britain. Yeah, not the pandemic. Let's see. Reaching for their playbooks, Republicans on Capitol Hill and in the White House frantically flipped through their dog-eared playbooks from the 1980s to determine just the right tax cut for the moment. But the chapter on society-wide lockdowns was nowhere to be found. Many Republicans shrugged and proposed a tax cut anyway. President Donald Trump called for reducing the capital gains rate and joined Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in pushing for an expansion of the corporate meals and entertainment deduction. The famous 3-martini lunch that Jimmy Carter used to talk about. Stephen Moore, an economic advisor to Trump, argued for a payroll tax deferral that even the U.S. Chamber of Commerce dismissed as unworkable. And yeah, it's a question of markets. Sir James Goldsmith, who was the very definition of a corporate barbarian, had sort of a, let's see, conversion near the end of his life. And he argued very strongly against big business. And he once on the Charlie Rose show made the shocking claim that markets exist to serve people, not the other way round. Charlie Rose and the woman from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce nearly fainted in shock. Here's another quote from the story. Libertarians have no time for such nuance, and the purportedly conservative establishment has paid it little heed either. Senator Pat Toomey, Republican of Pennsylvania, has defined capitalism as, quote, nothing more than economic freedom, unquote, a sentiment echoed by Haley, who has warned that any interference with that freedom would head down the slow path to socialism. Yes, because, of course, the United States government does not interfere in the economy at all. Who are these people? Who are these people that can look at the economic and social conditions of the United States and argue that it was some sort of laissez-faire paradise? It is, or it was. Jack Spencer, the vice president of the Heritage Foundation's Institute for Economic Freedom and Opportunity, has suggested, why don't we look at a policy and just ask, does it expand economic freedom? The conservative columnist Amity Shlaes has gone so far as to declare, markets do not fail us. We fail markets. You ever notice, you ever wonder why libertarianism has never been popularly successful? It's because of people like Amity Shlaes, who say things that are deranged. Peter Coy in Bloomberg, Orrin Cass urges conservatives to shed free market orthodoxy. A multi-ethnic working class conservatism might just have a chance, writes the former Romney advisor. Donald Trump, can't live with him, can't live without him. Republican Party leaders aren't expelling Trump from the party because even though they lost the White House and both houses of Congress during his tenure, they're afraid they would do even worse without him, as they're linked to the working class. But center-right thinker Oren Cass says there's a brand of non-Trumpian conservatism that can win national elections by hanging on to working-class GOP voters while appealing to culturally conservative Democrats. Cass, who worked on Mitt Romney's 2008 and 2012 presidential campaigns, says the key is jettisoning the party's commitment to what he calls market fundamentalism. Market fundamentalism, which is all about getting government out of people's lives, is more libertarian than truly conservative, Cass writes. Markets reduce people to their material interests and reduce relationships to transactions, he writes. They prioritize efficiency to the exclusion of resilience, sentiment, and tradition. Shorn of constraints, they often reward the most socially corrosive behaviors and can quickly undermine the foundations of a stable community, for instance, pushing families to commit both parents to full-time market labor or strip mining talent from across the nation and consolidating it in a narrow set of cosmopolitan hubs. While libertarians stress liberty, liberals overwhelmingly prioritize care, especially care for victims of oppression, Cass writes. Citing Jonathan Haidt, the New York University social psychologist, true conservatives aren't so easily pigeonholed, he writes. Again, citing Haidt, he says conservatives tend to exhibit a much broader range of moral concerns, giving fairly equal weight to care, liberty, fairness, loyalty, authority, and sanctity. And then he mentions what Amity Shlaes had said about markets. One person responded, if a system doesn't work for humans, it is a bad system, even if you can find a way to blame the humans for it. If humans aren't good enough for a system to work, the system is still the one that should be discarded. Another joke, whenever I fail the markets, I whip myself. The markets have gone through so much for me. It's the least I can do. On the other hand, Trump is a tricky figure for people like Cass because he's far from a market fundamentalist. He did sign a big tax cut that mainly benefited corporations and the wealthy, and he aggressively pushed deregulation, but he also raised tariffs, which is anathema to free marketers. He gained strong political support from the constituencies that Cass says should be part of the new governing coalition, including white working-class voters and remarkable numbers of non-whites. Cass acknowledges that Trump's success, quote, gestured toward the possibility of the right of center consolidating a cultural conservative bloc across races, unquote. So what's the alternative to Trump? When Cass spells out what a center-right party platform would look like, it sounds almost Biden-esque, does it now? It would not hew rigidly to an agenda of tax and spending cuts, deregulation, and free trade. It would recognize the pernicious effects that high levels of economic inequality can have on the social fabric. It would consider the benefits of locally owned establishments, not just hyper-efficient conglomerates. It would embrace a vibrant labor market, giving workers power in the job market, representation in the workplace, and support in the community. You know, I think that the best way to deal with libertarians is the same way that one would deal with people who said that the moon is made of green cheese or that the earth is flat. They're lunatics, and we don't take advice from lunatics. To attempt to argue with such people is completely a waste of time. There is no data that can persuade libertarians that their model is broken because it is based on lunatic assumptions. Speaking of lunacy, this is from CNBC, Hannah Meow. Democrats introduced sweeping immigration bill with 8-year pathway to citizenship. Bye-bye, America. Democrats in Congress introduced a sweeping immigration bill backed by President Joe Biden Thursday. The proposed legislation would raise per-country caps on family and employment-based legal immigration numbers. Family-based immigration numbers. Yes, that's what we have in Canada. Family reunification as the top priority. Well, you know, if you really want to reunite these families, you should tell the people that are here in North America to go home instead of 2 people coming over and then inviting dozens or hundreds or thousands of their extended family. It would also replace the word alien with non-citizen in law. While Democrats hold thin majorities in both chambers of Congress, the legislation would require a minimum of 10 Republican votes to defeat a Senate filibuster. The proposed bill would establish an 8-year path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants who arrived in the U.S. by January the 1st, provide an expedited path to citizenship for farm workers and undocumented young people who arrived in the U.S. as children with temporary protected status under DACA, raise the per capita caps on family and employment-based legal immigration numbers, repeal the penalty that prohibits undocumented immigrants who leave the country from returning to the U.S. for between 3 and 10 years, expand transnational anti-drug task forces in Central America. Oh, you mean these illegals are bringing drugs with them? Yes. Jesus Malverde, that's a popular Mexican introduction into the United States. You know, when I watched Breaking Bad and I saw, you know, the amount of attention given to the satanic aspects of Mexican drug cartels, since this was such a popular, influential series, I thought, oh, so people are going to learn about this and they're going to be shocked that these are the kind of people that are coming to the United States in considerable numbers. And so, well, we have to stop that, right? No, none of that happened. The path to citizenship would give undocumented immigrants 5 years of provisional status, after which they could apply for a green card. 3 years later, they could apply for citizenship. On his first day of office, Biden signed an executive order terminating the state of emergency at the southern border declared by former President Donald Trump and pausing border wall construction projects. Yeah, America is facing terrible unemployment problem with no end in sight, certainly if Biden has his way. But the solution is more people. Yeah, you have to come out of the shadows. You have to compete with people who are born in America. And what does that lead to? It leads to substantially lower wages and a tremendous transfer of wealth from poorer people to richer people. I guess this is the caring aspect of Bidenism. Facebook to label climate change posts like COVID vote content. This is from Kurt Wagner at Yahoo Finance. Facebook Inc. will begin labeling some user posts that mentions climate change in the same way it is annotated posts discussing elections and COVID-19. A sign the social network is taking climate-related misinformation more seriously. Oh, yes, it is written in stone, the facts about climate change. Is it? The labels will direct users to Facebook's Climate Science Information Center, an existing hub that includes related news articles, climate change data, and recommendations for pages to follow. The new labels will be added to some posts about climate change, regardless of their accuracy, a strategy Facebook has used with widely other discussed topics as a way to fight falsehoods. Oh, but it's regardless of their accuracy. CEO Mark Zuckerberg, who apparently has declared war on Australia. Zuckerberg does not yet have a nuclear capacity, but I wonder how soon he will get that. He's argued that the best way to keep misinformation from spreading on his networks is not just to remove misleading posts, but to offer people accurate information from authoritative sources. The labels are rolling out first to users in the UK, though the plan is to bring them to more countries soon. Facebook has been used to spread climate misinformation in much the same way the service is used for sharing all kinds of misleading posts. False statements about climate change reviewed by Facebook's fact checkers are flagged, but unlike COVID-19 misinformation, climate posts are not typically removed. Yes, and so Facebook is our ministry of truth, although government ministries of truth are coming soon to Canada and perhaps to the United States as well. The expanded labels were announced Thursday along a handful of other climate-related updates. Facebook is adding a new section to its information center dedicated to debunking climate change myths. Oh, you mean like when Gordon Brown said that the world was coming to an end in 5 years unless everything was turned upside down? The world did not come to an end. Like when Cabinet Minister John Baird, conservative cabinet minister, said over a decade ago that winters as we have known them in Canada are coming to an end. Facebook, of course, it's a platform. It is not a publisher. Well, they are a publisher. They are a publisher, and they're getting away with it. They're getting away with it because what people do not want to be on the wrong side of Mark Zuckerberg. Is he a tremendously popular person? That has that's not been my impression, but perhaps I'm not looking at this correctly. This is from the Associated Press. Country star Luke Combs has apologized for using Confederate flag images in performances from nearly a decade ago, saying he is now aware of how painful the symbol is. Combs addressed the images during a panel discussion, because this is what we want to see, country singers in panel discussions, Wednesday night with singer Maren Morris. And I looked this woman up, and my word, she is nasty looking. She's got a ring through her nose, which is, I suppose that's what country music has come to. There's no excuse for those images, Combs, 30, stated during the conversation. In the music video for his 2014 song, Can I Get an Outlaw?, Combs can be seen in front of several people clad in clothing featuring the Confederate flag. The North Carolina-born crooner said the images were from 7 or 8 years ago, and he did not understand what that flag meant as a young man. As I've grown in my time as an artist, and as the world has changed drastically in the last 5 to 7 years, I'm now aware of how painful that image can be to someone else. I would never want to be associated with something that brings so much hurt to someone else. Many people claim that the cross or the crucifix is a very painful image to them. Should that be banned too? I don't want to give people any ideas, especially Canadians, given that we're arresting preachers now in Canada for COVID crimes. Yep, that's what we're doing in Canada now. So what is coming up next here? Oh, yes. Some sort of controversy about female physicians and how much they are paid compared to male physicians. There's a glass ceiling there. Someone leading the fight for gender equity in medicine is a person who rejoices in the name of Dr. Nikki Stamp, Nikki. Physicians have stripper names now, do they? FRACS, heart and lung transplant surgeon, author, TV presenter, PhD candidate, feminist, hashtag I look like a surgeon. Oh, so here's this blonde-haired woman with long, wavy hair, and she's got the three-quarter pose to the camera like that. Ooh, aren't I hot? I would not willingly entrust my life to a glamour puss who calls herself Nikki. No, she doesn't look like a surgeon or a serious person. I was talking about Jessica Valenti yesterday, and I knew certain things about this woman, but I went to Wikipedia and I thought, have they excised stuff from her entry which might be considered embarrassing? The feminist who gets one abortion is understandable, expected even. The woman, the mother who gets two, though, must be doing something wrong with her life. This is a quote from Jessica Valenti's book, Sex Object. And this is from the Rewire news group. Jessica Valenti is a feminist author, co-founder of Feministing.com and columnist of The Guardian US. Her new book, Sex Object, explores what it's like to come of age as a female in a misogynist, patriarchal society. Her experiences with abortion and motherhood have reinforced her feminist, pro-choice beliefs. Valenti has had 2 abortions. The first was the result of an unwanted pregnancy, and the second ended a very wanted pregnancy that could have been fatal. Well, it was certainly fatal to the baby, wasn't it? The first wasn't a difficult decision at all. She actually said, this was in the last couple of days, my abortion, the first one, made it possible for me to finish my first book. I'm glad you finished your book, Mommy. Yes, the second was profoundly painful. The first one, she just didn't want to be pregnant. There's a way to prevent that. There's various ways to prevent getting pregnant. Still, she says one experience was not more valid than the other. Yes, I've heard her explanation of her second abortion, and I don't believe her for a second. Was a woman in her, late 30s at the time. She wasn't using contraception. She didn't have her tubes tied. No, I think she simply changed her mind. But Jessica Valenti has written many books. Let's go through some of them. He's a Stud, She's a Slut, and 49 Other Double Standards Every Woman Should Know. She's the co-editor of Yes Means Yes, Visions of Female Sexual Power in a World Without Rape. And this is my favorite. In 2009, she published The Purity Myth, How America's Obsession with Virginity is Hurting Young Women, about the way ideals about women's sexuality are being used to weaken women's rights. A documentary based on the film The Purity Myth was released in 2011. America's obsession with virginity and purity. Is this woman certifiable? Does she ever go on the internet? Does she ever watch television? Does she go to the movies? In 2012, she published Why Have Kids? A New Mom Explores the Truth About Parenting and Happiness. Valenti published in 2016 Sex Object, a memoir. Yes. Yes, okay. But this is the kind of rubbish that the elite decides that they're going to shove down our throats. To wit, America is obsessed with virginity and the purity of women. Ho ho, very satirical. Let's go to the chat. The antisocial contract says distributism equals communism. Well, I don't think so. Chocokin666 says not allowing myself a cigarette unless at least an hour goes by. Metal Mike says, like a surgeon, hey, cutting for the very first time. Like a surgeon, here's a waiver for you to sign. DB Cooper says Jessica Valenti is physically very ugly. I have a rule about that. I learned this working with books and also, reading a lot of books, that you look at the portrait of the author, typically on the flyleaf on the inside back cover. This is the best that they can possibly look, because the best makeup artists, the best photographers, etc., have been enlisted to make this person look the best that person can. So when you see a formal portrait of a woman or a man, that person is substantially less better looking in reality. I mentioned some weeks ago this woman who for years was the top newscaster in British Columbia and, one of the top in Canada. And she was, famed as a glamour puss, if you will, a sex symbol even. And I happened to run into her on West Hastings Street. She was staring into an expensive boutique. And I passed by and I thought, is that this woman, the woman from Channel 8? And it was. First of all, I was shocked at how short she was, probably under 5 feet tall. And secondly, she had rosacea, such that her face was as red as a tomato. But of course, she didn't look like that on TV. TR379 says, welcome back, Cotter. Very, very ugly show with ugly people, but not funny either. Hasn't done well in reruns. I do remember that Cotter's wife in that show, what was her name? Marcia Strassman? Gorgeous woman. Roulette Crack says, I want to apologize for saying the bottom fell out of the market yesterday for all those engaged in open fornication markets 10 years from now. I don't know. Okay. Anyone says the guy who was Travolta's enemy on Cotter later did the voice of Roger Rabbit. DB Cooper says, I find most women I've known were simply too pure. The anti-social contract says soon all females will have OnlyFans and a harem, and males will not be allowed outside without female supervision. Okay. Michael Mike says, I appreciate one thing about American libertarians. They tend to oppose unnecessary militaristic intervention. Or is that just Rand Paul? It may be just Rand Paul, because I noticed the crowd at Reason magazine has recently taken up the line that, smashing to pieces foreign countries like Iraq is a good thing, because American libertarian norms will be imposed on these people by force. Yes, that is the line that the Reason crowd has been pushing. Okay, so let's go to James Burns, the Machiavellians, Defenders of Freedom. We're talking about Robert Michels. Burnham writes, democratic theory is based on the principle of, quote, self-government, unquote. The persons belonging to a social group are, according to democratic theory, able to and properly ought to govern themselves. It is possible to imagine and even to discover social groups in which this theory is fully realized. Such would be a small company of adults, half a dozen or so, united for some jointly held purpose, business or recreation or crime, whatever it might be, who shared the same interests and level of culture and who reached decisions unanimously after an adequate discussion by what we call a meeting of minds. Certainly such groups, which are not unknown, can be intelligibly said to be practicing, with respect to their organized purpose, self-government. Their members are, plainly enough, governing themselves. However, as soon as a group becomes at all large, and the politically important groups of modern civilized society are very large, it is necessary, still retaining the democratic intention, to introduce arbitrary rules that are not wholly in accord with democratic theory. For example, the group has to be redefined in such a way as to exclude certain individuals who are nevertheless subject to its decisions. Children up to a certain arbitrarily determined age, criminals, insane persons, and so on. Usually, it may be added, additional restrictions apply even in practice, even when not in theory. Property and racial and educational restrictions, to mention some of the most prominent. Secondly, since in larger groups we seldom get opinions that are both freely given and unanimous, it is necessary to accept the decision of a numerical majority as the decision of the entire group. Both of these qualifications are obviously unavoidable, and no sensible person could object to them. Nevertheless, it should not be overlooked that they do contradict strict democratic theory, even though it is easy enough for a clever philosopher to patch up the theory in order to allow for them. They are enough to show that strict and full democracy is not possible in practice. However, having noted this, we shall accept them as a legitimate emendation of democratic theory and go on to inquire whether democracy, thus circumscribed, is compatible with the facts of organization. Even if we accept majority opinion as democratically valid for the entire group, it is at once plain that in the case of large groups, strict or direct democracy is impossible for mechanical and technical reasons. A large group cannot itself directly decide about its own affairs because there is no place big enough to permit a large group to assemble for discussion and decision. Even if the group is sufficiently small to be contained within one place, a study of crowd psychology shows that the decisions voted by a large crowd seldom reflect the considered opinions of the constituent members of the crowd. Choices have to be limited to a few simple alternatives, whereas the great number of divergent views may actually be held by various individuals. Only a few speakers can be heard, not all who think they have something to say. The devices of oratory, appeals to irrelevant sentiment, enthusiasm, boredom, and weariness sway the crowd while it remains together. In a large assembly, votes are very often unanimous by acclamation, when a survey of the individuals either before or shortly after the meeting would show large minorities or even a majority against the voted policy. All of these characteristics of the crowd are well known. Even if they could be overcome or should be disregarded, the simple fact remains that the operating political groups that function and develop societies, the state itself or mass political parties, are far too large and too scattered in residence to be brought together in one place at one time. In reaching group decisions, there is no technical means to bring the will of the group, even if this could be somehow determined directly to bear on the problem at hand. Well, now we have the internet, but the same problems of crowd psychology and the necessity to winnow down possible decisions to a small, easily understood handful, they still obtain. Furthermore, many of the group's decisions must be made quickly if the organized group is not to be severely weakened or destroyed. If the armed force of the enemy strikes, the nation must strike back at once. A political party unable to react quickly to the important events of the day, to meet or forestall sudden moves of rival parties or of the state, to take a position on wars and strikes and revolutions would soon go under. Sometimes it is said that the events which require quick decision are exceptional and therefore do not count in the general history of the organizations. But it is just these events demanding quick action that are the great and crucial events settling the fate of organizations. Again, from a merely mechanical and technical standpoint, it is impossible for a large group as a whole to make a quick decision. There's just no way for all the members to participate. Let's look at COVID-19 in that regard. We were told that the experts were in favor of masks, lockdowns, social distancing, or whatever. Well, the fact is that not all experts are in favor of this, and there is no empirical evidence that these things are efficacious. But the media got on board. The experts say this must be done. There was no conversation of any depth. There was no debate about this. It was simply decided that society was going to be, eliminated, and the economy was going to be crushed. And afterwards, this being decided, the people were asked about it, and they said, oh, yes, we're in favor of this. That's typically how these things go. When an organization grows to a certain size and when its aims have a certain scope and importance, the conduct of the organizational affairs becomes itself a considerable activity. There are innumerable bureaucratic details that must be seen to if the organization is to be kept alive. There are financial, administrative, diplomatic problems to be settled. When organizations such as political parties or trade unions, the facts of the economic and political situation must be at hand. Campaigns must be planned and carried out, negotiations entered into with other organizations, speeches prepared and delivered, articles written and published to be effectively performed. Some of these tasks require special talents. All of them need training, and all take up a great amount of time. The special talents are not possessed by all, and the great bulk of the membership, even if it had the inclination, which it does not, cannot acquire the training or give the time. The principle of the division of labor operates. I should mention something about Trump in regard to this. The absence of an alternative elite meant that Trump had to hire in both with regard to cabinet ministers and aides from the elite, because people of contrary political opinions have been kept out of the elite. And if they ever raise their head above the parapet to say, I disagree with the narrative, then they are expelled from the elite. And I predicted back in 2016, some months before Trump was elected, that he was going to have a serious problem with this. Burnham continues, the principle of the division of labor operates. Certain individuals specialize in the tasks peculiar to the organization and its operational life. They devote all or a considerable portion of their time and intelligence to the organization. They perfect themselves in the organizational duties. Once the organization is fairly large and its tasks of even a minimum importance, from those of a country club to those of an imperial state, this development too is unavoidable. Except through such a division of labor and specialization, there is no way for the organization to continue in active existence. To sum up, all of these causes work alike and inescapably to create within the organization a leadership. The leadership of minority, and in a large organization, always a relatively small minority, is distinguished from the mass of the organization. The organization is able to keep alive and to function only through its leaders. And we'll return to Mikkels and the question of leadership tomorrow. A quick roundup on dread word, COVID-19. This is from the Mail. Harriet Alexander, Donald Trump has accused Joe Biden of either lying or being mentally gone after the president on Tuesday night said his administration arrived to find no COVID-19 vaccines available. Does Joe Biden really think this, or is it a question of him being mentally gone? Perhaps he's just he can he can do Mario Kart racing, right? Perhaps anything beyond that is more than he is capable of. Biden, asked about combating COVID, told host Anderson Cooper, it's one thing to have the vaccine, which we didn't have when we came into office, but a vaccinator, how do you get the vaccine into someone's arm? His comments were immediately seized upon by critics who pointed out that a vaccine had been available since before Christmas. We were giving millions of shots, millions of doses, said Trump on Wednesday, speaking by phone to host Greg Kelly. So he was either not telling the truth or he's mentally gone, one or the other. Joe Biden being killed on that thing. Even the haters said, well, wait a minute, this vaccine was announced long before. The narrative can be rewritten. Perhaps the media will be telling us, and experts at PolitiFact and elsewhere were saying, well, actually, there wasn't a vaccine. Actually, I'm almost certain that that is going to happen. Again, from the Mail, 1 in 3 U.S. military service members refuse to take COVID-19 vaccine, early data shows. Preliminary data suggests up to 1 to 3 refuse it. That's still lower than the general population, as half of civilians are refusing shot. Officer says soldiers are susceptible to disinformation about vaccine online. Yes. Yes. Experimental drugs rush through at warp speed that have a nasty habit of killing babies in the womb. And we've already heard of one story where a woman was fired, a pregnant woman was fired because she refused to get the vaccine because she feared for the life of her baby as a result. Let's go to William Briggs. Dear quacks and experts, your loss function is not our loss function. Going to start with something that will at first seem random, but stick with me. Lithium is a known antidepressant and has been associated with lower risk of suicide and increased docility. Suicide is undesirable, while docility, especially in the time of occult white supremacy, is desirable. Therefore, lithium should be pumped into all municipal water supplies. Make sense to you? No. What if an expert said it? Is it convincing then? Still no. What if that expert, a genuine expert with a credentialed certification in expertology, is employed by the mighty U.S. government? All right, hold that in mind and let's move to the next random argument. The odds of winning the jackpot in an average Las Vegas slot machine is about 1 in 49,836,032. Call it 1 in 50 million for ease. These numbers are true and reliable. Winning the jackpot is reliable. Therefore, the government should mandate each American citizen, people who broke the law to come here are excused, once a week bet a minimum of $1,000 on slots as a replacement for Social Security. This one makes sense. Same modifier as before. This is expert opinion. You going along? Now let's move from these two seemingly random arguments to one with which you are more familiar. The risk of dying with, and not necessarily from, corona doom for those under 44 years old is no higher than 0.00017. And indeed, it is much lower than the younger one is. The risk of dying from something other than corona doom with the same age cutoff is at least more than 14 times higher. Therefore, you should not be allowed outside without a mask, potentially forever, and you can't go to your non-essential job either, also potentially forever, because you might die with and not necessarily from corona doom. Before you scoff about that forever, thinking it's satire or a bit of fun hyperbole, read this article about a crazed expert embedded in the U.S.'s grossly inaptly named SAGE group. This professor, John Edmonds, said face masks might have to be worn forever. Not just face masks forever, but other restrictions too, such as the rule of 6, which allows people to arrest or disperse groups of more than 6. Why not 7? The science is too complex for you to understand. Here is the point of these seemingly disparate arguments. It does not follow that because lithium might lower the risk of suicide and increase docility, that everybody should be forced to take it. It does not follow lithium or soma should be mandatory, even if experts, yay, even government experts, decide it's a good idea. Experts, incidentally, did decide lithium in water supplies is a good idea. It hasn't caught on with governments or the public yet, but only because they haven't worked themselves into a sufficiently fearful state over suicides or the presence of the non-docile. No act follows from knowing a risk or a probability, such as winning a jackpot or dying from a disease. Just because winning a jackpot is good does not mean betting is. And just because dying from a disease is bad, it does not mean removing liberties to avoid it is good. Experts do not know what I've just told you. Experts have decided that since they know more about facts, like how lithium causes docility, that they therefore get to decide on the morality and propriety of any and all acts based on these facts. We used to know all these things. We don't anymore. Now we have experts who say idiotic, insane things like we have to wear masks forever, pronouncements which we have to pretend to take seriously because the expert is in government employ. This expert won't be tarred or feathered or even laughed into oblivion. He'll almost surely be promoted. A story from the Financial Times: horrifying death toll prompts calls to prioritize jabs for disabled people. I had a problem with that story because it doesn't really define what disabled means, and it talks about learning disabled, severe or even minor. But then it noted the very strong correlation between being learning disabled and belonging to other categories, which do not correlate to longer life. But yes, there is, it's funny, these people must be vaccinated first. Oh, racialized people, or these people should be vaccinated first, even as it becomes obvious that there's an extraordinarily large number of people who are only going to get the vaccine if they are held down in a chair, because they won't take it voluntarily. This is from Will Jones at Lockdown Skeptics. Well, secondary school pupils in England return to class. They will be tested by their school at the start of each term, and parents will be expected to test their children twice every week, according to the Telegraph. Face masks will also be made compulsory for pupils in English secondary schools where social distancing is not possible outside classroom bubbles. It's not clear what will happen if parents or children do not wish to comply with the continual testing regime, but presumably the children will not be permitted to attend school in person. Needless to say, this is an outrageous imposition on children and parents. The healthy should not have to be constantly subjected to screening for a disease for which they have no symptoms and from which they are not sick. There is scant evidence that asymptomatic individuals drive more than a tiny fraction of transmission. The rollout of mass testing as part of a new normal to try to keep infection rates low is hard to square with the vaccine exit strategy that was driving government policy until a few weeks ago. Dominic Raab, who is a cabinet minister in Britain, told Sky News that rapid testing is a key part of the government's strategy to end lockdown, saying the aim is to do it, quote, at scale and at pace so that when you have upticks of the virus, we can come down on it like a ton of bricks, unquote. This is not a vaccine exit strategy. This is a zero COVID strategy. How will cases ever drop below 1,000 a day with testing being ramped up on such a scale? Zero COVID, it's the end. It is quite literally the end. That economic activity will come to a standstill, and people will be terrorized even more than they have been for the last year. Oh my God, the virus is not going away, and it keeps mutating like all viruses. Professor Dame Angela McLean, the chief scientific advisor at the Ministry of Defense and co-chair of the SPIM SAGE subgroup, told MPs yesterday that SAGE scientists have been crying out for politicians to determine the acceptable level of COVID risk so it is clear when the crisis can be deemed over. I was watching Laura Ingraham on Fox yesterday. I don't normally do this, but she made an interesting point. The COVID panic is going to remain around forever, or at least until November 2022, because this will result in mandatory postal voting. Yeah, which is very good news for the Democrats. Michael Tilsley, an epidemiologist from the University of Warwick, has told Freddie Sayers on Unheard We should really want the old normal back so we can see our loved ones and have that level of social interaction because we're a social species. A lot of the dystopian discussion of a new normal actually scares me because I think we lose that level of social interaction that actually keeps us going. We don't talk enough about mental health, and actually one of the big challenges in the last 12 months has been people who have suffered more from mental health challenges before the pandemic, but also an awful lot of people who have suffered as a result of the pandemic. What do we make of the 40.5% hospital-acquired COVID infection? Dr. Anne Bradshaw, a retired senior lecturer in adult nursing at Oxford Brookes, says hospital-spread infection is not a new problem. This is true, but it doesn't really accord to all the talk about frontline heroes and frontline warriors. Does it? Hospitals are dangerous places to be in, and hospitals have turned out to be, well, charnel houses during the COVID hysteria. You don't want to go to hospital unless you have to. That was always good advice, but this is advice now that, well, could save your life. A quick look at the chat before I move on to Theater Thursday. I saw this tweet, Suzanne Run. That's Dr. Nikki. Not a bad-looking woman, but I'd never trust her with a scalpel in her hand. Okay, warriors come out and dance on TikTok. Roulette Crack says grooming children to accept overzealous authoritarianism. Yeah. It just occurred to me that if schools, as a result of COVID hysteria, started resembling that Lindsay Anderson movie, If, I would not be surprised. Okay, let's move on to Theater Thursday. And I am talking today about a movie from 1949 called 12 O'Clock High. And 12 O'Clock High refers to aircraft directly above your position. I thought that I would start, just to give you a flavor of what this is about, I thought that I would start with a poem, a famous poem by Randall Jarrell, who served in the U.S. Army Air Force during World War II. And it's called The Death of the Ball Turret Gunner, published in 1945. From my mother's sleep, I fell into the state, and I hunched in its belly till my wet fur froze. 6 miles from earth, loosed from its dream of life, I woke to black flak and the nightmare fighters. When I died, they washed me out of the turret with a hose. So how dangerous was it to be on a B-17 bomber over Europe during World War II? Well, according to Paul Hossa, a postgraduate certificate change leadership at Cornell University, the U.S. 8th Army Air Force, which flew daylight missions over Europe, had a 19% death rate. If you survived being shot down, you had a 17% chance of becoming a POW. As an aside, RAF Bomber Command, which flew the night missions, had a 44.5% death rate and an 8% chance of becoming a POW. The average age of the bomber crew member was just 22 years of age. Prior to 1944, each crew had to complete 25 combat missions to become eligible to come home. Nevertheless, statistics at the time showed that each crew member had an average of a 1 in 4 chance of making it, or about 12 to 14 missions. Of course, a lot depended on what you did. A tail gunner, for instance, had a life expectancy of 4 missions. That's 2 weeks. A ball turret gunner wasn't much better. Plus, if the plane's engines were hit, it could knock out the turret's electrical or hydraulic systems. That meant that the ball turret gunner was stuck until they got back. If the damage affected the landing gear, it meant that the full weight of the plane came down on the gunner plus the skid. Obviously, there was literally nothing left. that gives you an idea of just how dangerous this occupation was. This film was directed by Henry King, who was a very successful Hollywood director. He directed over 100 films, and his career began at the very earliest days of Hollywood. The film he directed from 1938, called Alexander's Ragtime Band, was the highest grossing film from the 1930s from 20th Century Fox. He made a movie based on the Franz Werfel novel, The Song of Bernadette, which is about the miracle of Lourdes, which was quite popular. Other movies he made, later movies that people might have seen, The Gunfighter, David and Bathsheba, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, Carousel, The Sun Also Rises, Beloved Infidel, and Tender is the Night. I suppose he's considered a journeyman director. But this film, 12 O'Clock High, is technically accomplished in the extreme. The film was produced by Daryl Zanuck, who he comes from a town in Nebraska called Wahoo, and in the last census it had 4,500 people. Despite its small size, Wahoo was responsible for not only Daryl Zanuck, but for George Beadle, who won a Nobel Prize in genetics, Hall of Fame baseball player Sam Crawford, and Howard Hanson, the great American composer, conductor, and educator who ran the Eastman School of Music for decades. Hamlets make heroes, as Tom Wolfe's father once wrote him. The movie is based on a novel of the previous year by Cy Bartlett and Burnley Jr., and they wrote the screenplay. It stars Gregory Peck. Gregory Peck is one of the great actors of the 20th century. Certainly in terms of popularity, I have to say that I think that Gregory Peck was quite limited as an actor, but there was something that he was excellent at, which was playing men of nobility and authority. Although, if you've seen Scorsese's remake of Cape Fear, you see that Gregory Peck rather sends up his reputation because the character that he plays, defending, Max Cady, is just a blowhard. That's all he is. What if this movie were made today? Well, I can tell you something that would be different, because the lead roles would not be played by Americans. They would be played by actors from England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, because America does not produce men like Gregory Peck or John Wayne, Gary Cooper, etc. It simply doesn't. American actors today, they appear to be overgrown boys, not men, and half of them look like catamites. The film also stars Hugh Marlowe, who is I suppose you could say, a mid-level actor, and Gary Merrill, and those two reunited in the film All About Eve from 1950, written and directed by Joseph Mankiewicz, which is really outstanding, delightful film, and Bette Davis's best role. And let's look at the Dean Jagger won an Oscar for his role in this movie. Dean Jagger, if you've seen White Christmas, you will know him. He plays the retired general that there's a great reunion to help him out. Very moving. Music is by Alfred Newman, great film composer. Cinematography is by Leon Shamroy. It's a very nice depth of field in a lot of these shots. And King, he favored long takes, particularly the scenes later in the film of Gregory Peck after his collapse. This is a film, I suppose people would have been surprised or maybe even shocked when this film came out in 1949, which was only 4 years after World War II ended, because it is not a raw patriotic film. Not at all. It is not a sentimental film, and it doesn't really make any attempt to justify American involvement in the Second World War. You can compare it to a movie like Sergeant York, which was one of Gary Cooper's greatest performances. And if you watch that movie, you will find that, the real Sergeant York belonged to a Christian sect which was pacifist. And he found himself in the army during World War I, but he didn't want to kill people. And the army very much wanted him to kill people because he was a crack shot, 99 percentile. And so the officers in the film convince Sergeant York that God wants him to go to France to kill Germans. Yes, now why God would be particularly interested in that is an interesting question, but there's nothing like this about 12 O'Clock High. This is a film about leadership and the cost of leadership on leaders. And it's two different styles of leadership, which is I'm going to be on the side of my men, or I'm going to be on the side of my mission. And we find out, or this movie argues, that there's really not much difference between the two. That the movie shows the first leader of this squadron, played by Gary Merrill, who is very close to his man indeed, Keith Davenport, and they love him. But the squadron, it's the bad luck squadron, that there is an aura of doom about it. And their combat effectiveness is bad and is getting worse. And Gregory Peck, who plays Brigadier General Savage, decides a different approach. They say that movies are based on a true story. 12 O'Clock High, the novel and the movie, are based on several true stories, several true events. Pretty much everything that happens in this film happened in real life. There's a nice unity brought about by the beginning of the film, where we see Dean Jagger in England in 1949. He's taking a vacation, and he sees a Toby jug in an antique store, and he realizes it was the same Toby jug that was used by the squadron to demonstrate that they were in action. So he buys this and demands that it be packed very carefully. The shop owner tells him it's battered and it's worth only 10 shillings. Well, he doesn't care. And so he cycles out to the old airfield, which is now deserted. The runway is still there and the buildings are still there, but they're falling apart, and it is now occupied by cattle. And we see a return to that at the end of the film. And similarly, the first action of the film is we see after a spectacular crash landing. And I should mention that the stunt flying was done by the same stunt flyer who did the spectacular work in the Flight of the Phoenix, the original version, which I have reviewed previously. and highly plain, forcing the pilot into an impossible situation where he's attempting to fly the plane with one hand and keeping off a crazy man with the other. And we later see a film where a scene where Dean Jagger he offers to retrieve a severed arm from the plane. Dean Jagger begins the film as a major, and he is, I suppose he's in charge of paperwork. He is deeply attached to the original leader, Keith Davenport. And when General Frank Savage, Gregory Peck, shows up to take command, he initially sides against him, as does, well, everyone else. There's a school of thought that if one does not observe the small things, one will not observe the larger things as well. This has to do with military discipline. That soldiers should be, they should observe the rules regarding their dress and their insignia and all the rest of it. George S. Patton certainly believed this, and he was a very successful commander. Gregory Peck's character believes that one of the reasons for the jinx, the bad luck, is that standards have collapsed at the squadron, and he shows up and immediately tears a strip off the guard, because the guard just waves him through without looking at ID. He says, well, I could see it's a U.S. Army car. And Gregory Peck says, I could be Goering. Later, he busts clerical sergeant down to private because he is not wearing his insignia while on duty. He discovers that everyone seems to have disappeared, including Dean Jagger. And the chief, the second in command, played by Hugh Marlowe. And, well, he lays into him. And it turns out that his character, Marlowe's character, his father was a lieutenant general and a fine man. And it would appear that Marlowe's character is one of those people who thinks that he is bulletproof because his father is a big shot in the organization. He says to Ben Gately, I take it that you don't really care about the part you had in breaking one of the best men you'll ever know. Add to it that as air exec, you were automatically in command the moment Colonel Davenport left, and you met that responsibility exactly as you met his need. You ran out on it. You left the station to get drunk. Gately, as far as I'm concerned, you're yellow. Traitor to yourself, to this group, to the uniform you wear. It would be the easiest course for me to transfer you out, to settle some unsuspecting guy with a deadbeat. Maybe you think that's what you're going to get out of this, a free ride to some combat unit, but I'm not going to pass the buck. I'm going to keep you right here. I hate a man like you so much that I'm going to get your head down in the mud and tramp on it. I'm going to make you wish you'd never been born. This follows after Lieutenant Colonel Gately had referred to his rights, which enrages General Savage, who continues, I'm just getting started. You're going to stay right here and get a belly full of flying. You're going to make every mission. You're not air exec anymore. You're just an airplane commander. He had only flown 3 missions previously. And I want you to paint this name on the nose of your ship, Leper Colony, because in it, you're going to get every deadbeat in the outfit, every man with a penchant for head coals. If there's a bombardier who can't hit his plate with his fork, you get him. If there's a navigator who can't find the men's room, you get him because you rate him. Now, Savage's relationship with Stovall, Dean Jagger's character, well, he is drunk when he first meets him. He says it's the first time he's been drunk in 20 years, and he may get drunk again, and indeed he does. But of course, Stovall's character is he's administrative. He's not a fighting airman. So Gregory Peck is inclined to give him more leeway. especially when it turns out that Stovall, who had been a lawyer in private life, and a good one, he says, proves himself to be invaluable to the squadron with his administrative talents. He's also a sort of a gently humorous fellow, easy to get along with, and at a time when Savage has pretty much declared war on the whole squadron, well, he's wise enough to make a friend and ally of Stovall. After Savage lays down the law, pretty much everyone, all the flyers, file for transfers. And, well, Savage can't have that because he would have no command anymore. So he arranges with Stovall to delay them for up to 10 days in a hope that he can bring people around to his way of thinking. This is very dangerous, both for Savage and for Stovall, because of the possibility that the Inspector General is going to get involved, which would mean court-martials for both of them. But there's a speech here that Savage makes when he addresses the 918th Squadron for the first time. And I think this is the key to this movie. And it is argues against everything about hearts and minds and what we are fighting for and everything about the modern military. He says there will be a briefing for practice mission at 1100 this morning. That's right, practice. I've been sent here to take over what has become known as a hard luck group. Well, I don't believe in hard luck. So we're going to find out what the trouble is. Maybe part of it's your flying, so we're going back to fundamentals. But I can tell you now one reason I think you've been having hard luck. I saw it in your faces last night. I can see it there now. You've been looking at a lot of air lately, and you think you ought to have a rest. In short, you're sorry for yourselves. I don't have a lot of patience with this. What are we fighting for stuff? We are in a war, a shooting war. We've got to fight, and some of us have got to die. I'm not trying to tell you not to be afraid. Fear is normal. But stop worrying about it and about yourselves. Stop making plans. Forget about going home. Consider yourself already dead. Once you accept that idea, it won't be so tough. Now, if any man here can't buy that, if he rates himself as something special, with a special kind of hide to be saved, he better make up his mind about it right now, because I don't want him in this group. I'll be in my office for 5 minutes. You can see me there. This really gets to the heart of it. Wars, particularly wars fought on foreign soil, are fought. Soldiers are told to fight, and they fight. They are given orders, and they follow them. Any attempt to run wars on any other basis is going to fail. And when one looks at the achievement of the U.S. Army Air Force in World War II, it's fairly obvious that such a thing would not be possible today for all sorts of reasons. Oh, people are going to complain about this movie, where are the minorities? Where are the women? Well, there are no minorities because the U.S. Armed Forces were not integrated until by President Truman, until after the war. And no presidential administration was lunatic enough to put women on the front lines, well, until fairly recently. If one wants to win a war, then one must needs do what is necessary, and talks about hearts and minds and what we are fighting for, and women getting to express themselves by wearing their favorite hairdos or wearing lipstick or nail polish. This does not contribute to cohesion. It's been obvious since the Israelis experimented with this in the 1940s that women in combat position doesn't work for all sorts of reasons, one of which being that the men will do things in order to protect them, which puts everyone else at risk. Now, we see a similar thing that happens in 12 O'Clock High. that one of the near disastrous raid came about for one reason, is that one of the flyers decided to leave the formation in an attempt to help one of the planes which had been crippled. Well, it failed, and it failed both specifically and generally. You can't play favorites. You can't play favorites at all. And so Savage orders that all of the men are going to be reassigned roommates. What Savage says in this film about some of us have got to die, fear is normal, stop worrying about it and about yourself, stop making plans, forget about going home. This is very similar to the wisdom that Admiral James Stockdale, Medal of Honor winner, took out of his years of being a prisoner in North Vietnam. Stoicism. That he said that you must always believe that you will prevail. This is what he said. He was once asked which prisoners didn't make it out of Vietnam, and Stockdale said, "Oh, that's easy, the optimists. Oh, they were the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas, and Christmas would come and Christmas would go. Then they'd say, we're going to be out by Easter, and Easter would come and Easter would go, and then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again, and they died of a broken heart." This is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. And again, this stoicism of Stockdale and Savage, we find out, is not a desk-bound general. He flies a great many of these dangerous missions. Savage tells them, your loyalty should be to this squadron, to the men in the squadron, and you should have pride in this above all. And, to the extent that it's possible, to stay alive, this is going to help. Because people who think that, they're jinxed, bad luck, whatever, and they don't do the right thing about squadron formation and the rest of it, this is going to lead to failure of the mission and more dead. So Savage is given 10 days to turn things around, and he calls in the fellow who had gamely landed the plane at the beginning of the film, despite the determined opposition of a deranged man with half a head. And he's been recommended for the Medal of Honor. And he wants to get this young man on board, but there's a competing loyalty there. There's a superior officer, and, well, there's everyone else, the men he flies with, the men that he fights with. Eventually, Savage brings him around. You could see this young man as a kind of like a son to General Savage. And you can see Major Joe Cobb, who is a much older, tougher aviator, is kind of a brother figure to Gregory Peck. And, well, one of the lessons in this film is that General Savage learns, to his great cost, that, affection that goes beyond esprit de corps is dangerous. And it's especially dangerous in a squadron where the death rate is so very high. We see a turnaround in the behavior of Lieutenant Colonel Ben Gately, played by Hugh Marlowe, that at first we see only a white-hot hatred for General Savage, that he has been humiliated and continues to be humiliated, but he learns that the only way that he can get out of the leper colony is to prove himself, which he does to rather spectacular effect. And his hatred of General Savage is such that even after he visits him in the hospital to praise him and to be as solicitous as he can. Hugh Marlowe is having nothing of it. And then there's a tremendously affecting story with a nurse who passes on General Savage's changed view of him second hand. These B-17s were flying bombing missions over France and then later over Germany, stretching their resources to the utmost at a time when they did not have fighter support. That's one of the reasons why it was so very dangerous. It is the purpose of this squadron, the bomb 918th, is to demonstrate the efficacy of what they call precision daytime bombing. It is bombing of industrial, not civilian targets. And we see that there's something of a race against time there. They don't have much in the way of resources. Supposedly, 17,000 planes are coming, but unless they can demonstrate that precision bombing works, then it's likely that the whole idea will be scrubbed. And of course, they want to hit Germany. They want to hit the enemy directly. But the further they get into Germany, the more dangerous the flying becomes and the less likelihood that they will make it home one way or another. I wanted to mention in this regard that there was wholesale censorship of the losses of the USAAF, that it was believed that publicizing this or letting it be known would affect morale. And I'm just going to read briefly from a site called History and Headlines. On September 27, 1944, the Castle mission, which resulted in the largest loss by the USAAF group on any mission of World War II, was so successfully covered up that even today, few non-World War II experts are aware that it even occurred. The USAAF conducted roughly 20 bombing raids over Kassel, Germany from 1942 through 1945. These raids resulted in severe fires, the deaths of at least 10,000 inhabitants of the cities, and the destruction of much of the city center. Eventually, as the war began to conclude, American and British forces took the city following a battle from April 1st through 2nd, 1945. In a battle on September 27, 1944, in a battle that lasted perhaps just minutes, America's 445th Bomb Group suffered the worst losses of any American bomb group in all of World War II. Navigational errors led the doomed bomb group to become separated from the main border bomber stream and to lose their fighter escorts. The battle began with America's 39 planes facing an attack between 100 and 150 German fighters. The Americans used their famed B-24 Liberator to conduct their bombing raid, whereas the German fighters defending their city consisted of FW-190s and ME-109s. The outnumbered Americans were nearly completely wiped out, with 25 bombers crashing into German soil, 2 planes crash landing in occupied France, and 1 crashing near Brussels. 2 that did cross the English Channel were forced to land at the emergency strip at Manston, while 1 crashed near the base in Norfolk, and only a mere 4 American bombers actually landed at their home base in Tibenham. In addition to the loss of planes, 115 out of 238 pilots and crewmen were killed in action or died of injuries sustained in the brief battle. 2 more died in crashes in Norfolk and in Belgium. By contrast, and despite numerical superiority, Germany lost a comparable number of aircraft, 29 planes, with 18 of their pilots being killed in action. In the battle's aftermath, certain members of the Allied command staff covered up the disaster so as to prevent any possible decrease in the morale of Allied air crews. Yet even now, over 50 years later, few outside of scholars and veterans remember the disaster. I have personally asked some well-read former members of the U.S. Air Force who are unfamiliar with the incident. And so the largest loss by the USAAF group in World War II was largely swept under the rug. The question that brought down the previous commander Keith Davenport, was what is maximum effort? How much can you expect from a man? How much can you get from a man before he breaks? Now, this is a question that remains unanswered by the movie, obviously, because it is different. It is different for each man. And we find that even General Savage, who is determined to give maximum effort, over and beyond, etc., he reaches his limit as well. We see that he is seen from the beginning as being a cold, heartless man, and actually the opposite is true. But it's not good for a leader. It's a fatal flaw in a leader, the need to be liked. This is another lesson from history, which we have abandoned. And in men of highly emotional men are best advised to lock that down as best they can, lest they risk collapse. It turns out that Frank Savage has made the same mistake that Colonel Davenport did, is that he believed himself to be indispensable to the squadron, indispensable to his men. Of course, no man in war is indispensable, but when one makes such a profound personal connection to others, when you ask them to risk their lives, to give their lives, and they say, "Sir, yes, sir," such as the enthusiasm demonstrated by the squadron, that people who are not airmen begin climbing onto the ships, stowing away, getting a chance to fire the guns at German planes, even the chaplain. And Savage is, he's quite put out when he finds out how many people who should not have been on the planes have decided to get a piece of the action. And he tells the chaplain that, he says, "Your domain is sin, and I would kindly ask you to restrict your field of operations to that." But one of the aspects of leadership is to not ask a man to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. And General Savage comes through with flying colors in that regard. When you can motivate men to the extent that even people who aren't supposed to be doing the job want to do the job, well, then you have succeeded. But it's the nature of the job that all of these men were doing during World War II, that it's not something that can be maintained forever. Keith Davenport, Gary Merrill, he's kicked upstairs to Bomber Command. You see, again, he doesn't take this personally. It's just business. He realizes that it is just business. It is pointless to take any of these things personally, especially under a situation where the death rate is absolutely horrific. And he doesn't. And Savage, he doesn't take things personally at the beginning, and then he very strongly takes them personally. And that is where he reaches his limit. There's so much this movie teaches about leadership and about, men, frankly. We hear a lot of talk about boys in the armed forces, but Savage isn't having any of it. He says these are men. He says it's a difficult thing to grow up so quickly, but they will do it because it is necessary of them. And again, when I think of modern militaries, with their chain restaurants on the ships and everything, and their forward bases in Asia to give them all the comforts of home and all the access to their wives and girlfriends back home. This seems to me to be a serious error, because if you had all the comforts of home, why would you be killing people 10,000 miles away from where you live or risking your own life. So this is top class in every respect. Every aspect of this movie is as good as it could be. There is humor in the film too, which I have barely alluded to. It is, as I say, Henry King is not known as an auteur, but one is very impressed by his direction in this, also the composition of the shots. And of course, the movie has real, actual World War II aerial footage from both American and German sources, which is cleverly integrated into the film, using shots made for the film set against a background of dog fights. And there are few films which really give the impression of just how thrilling and how dangerous and deadly it is to have been a flyer, either a bomber flyer on a bomber or on a fighter plane. So this movie has my highest recommendation. Oh, I should mention something about the transfer. You can get this as a Blu-ray from 20th Century Fox. I'm looking at the review of, I have a copy of it. I'm looking at the review on DVD Beaver. It looks pretty good, although the print was not in the best of condition. There's some problem with fading of black and some flickering. On the other hand, it does have a commentary by Rudy Belmer, John Burlingham, and Nick Redman, and other extras. And let's see, you can get this. Oh, it says currently unavailable. Apparently, you can watch it on Amazon Prime Video. Used copies, I suppose, should be available. Just let me check one more thing here. It's available in Britain still in Blu-ray, 18 pounds. But this is a movie that, plays on television and streaming services all the time. And as I say, it's available on Amazon Prime. So let's have a final look at the chat here. Brandon Smith says, Des Boat, best war movie. Well, I rate Des Boat very highly. I remember I saw it in the theater. Remember theaters? Of course, you're in the dark for 2 hours, and well, it's rather more than 2 hours, and it's pretty dark in that film. And after I came out, I was struggling to breathe for about an hour later, as if I had been suffocated. Watch it in German with subtitles. Yes, I do prefer the German version, although there seems to be innumerable versions of Das Boot, including the TV version of that, which is 5-6 hours longer. Hell is for Heroes with Steve McQueen. Yeah, an interesting story about that. We should read about the ending, okay, and how the ending was accidental. I believe they could run out of money or time, so it ends with an extremely ambiguous shot, which the critics saw as being existential. Manfred von Tisselbaum says, does Best Years of Our Lives count as a World War II movie? If so, that's the best one, in my opinion. Anren recommends Attack with Jack Palance, Lee Marvin, and Eddie Albert. Well, Lee Marvin was there. You know, he was in the Marines in the South Pacific. He told John Borman, he and John Borman, the director, were very close friends. He confessed to him that after all that he had done and seen in the South Pacific, he could never be a normal person again. Kelly's Heroes, greatest World War II film. Yeah, you got that Donald Sutherland there playing a very late 60s character in a World War II film. The Final Countdown with Kirk Douglas isn't a great movie, but it's 2 hours of airplane porn, says Palmcasso 88. You know, there's a Tom Hanks movie which has just come out, which is some World War II carrier convoy story. And they decided to CGI the ocean. In the ocean, of course, there's a lot of ocean in this movie. And it not only just looked bad, it looked nauseating, actually. Media Hit says that new Midway film has Woody Harrelson and Dennis Quaid in minor roles. Woody Harrelson is good, actually. Dennis Quaid, he started out good, but became a terrible overactor. I once joked, he made a movie with Sigourney Weaver and it was just terrible. That if there were a Dennis Quaid school of acting, it would be step 1, grimace. Step 2, shout. Step 3, repeat. Enron says Tora is pretty good. Better than its reputation. It is pretty good. Actually, Media Hit says this film seems to have some good military speeches. Again, it is very realistic. It is not simple. It is not attempting to be a tearjerker. It is not sentimental. It is not larded up with the chauvinism. Those are some of the reasons why it is so good. I mean, I suppose you could have made a similar movie about the other side in the war. Of course, you see in Despot, there's no patriotic rah-rah in that film either. Oh, Tuskegee won the air war, says Chogokin 66. I don't want to. I don't want to get into that. Let's just say that it's a myth. Enron says, Kevin, any thoughts on Peck's performance in Moby Dick? My thoughts were that I don't know whether that Melville's novel is unfilmable or not. It just you have a real problem when you take a book as big as that and attempt to condense it down to 2 hours. Oh, I see we have a discussion of catamites in the chat. And on that bombshell, I'm going to wrap it up. Next week on Theater Thursday, I'm going to be discussing another film from 1945 from one of the most successful American directors. Again, though not considered an auteur, Michael Curtis. It's called Mildred Pierce and stars Joan Crawford, who is very much underrated as an actress. On the book club tomorrow, I'm going to be discussing Solzhenitsyn's memoir of his time in America, Between Two Millstones, Part 2. I shall be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you'd click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which frankly I could really use right now, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, donations to the live stream can be made directly to me via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. Manfred van Thistlebaum says, do a Preston Sturges film. I've already reviewed one of him on Theater Thursday, but I will do more. No question about that. Anron says, I really like Quaid in The Right Stuff. Yes, that's when he was still good, and he's quite good in Inner Space as well. But you see he plays these kind of cocky jerks, right? You're quite good at that. Anyway, I shall leave you, as always, with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.